spotlight talks. So we're happy for our first spotlight talk to have Keita from the Bird Society of Singapore to give a talk about birds and more specifically sounds of birds. So without further ado, I hand over to Keita.
Hi everyone, I'm going to start my talk off with a seemingly ridiculous claim. If someone blindfolds me and puts me in the middle of a park somewhere in Singapore and releases a spotted dove, zebra dove and pink-necked green pigeon at random order, I will be able to identify them just by the way they sound when they fly. Some of you might be thinking, well, that sounds like nonsense, I don't believe you. Others might be thinking, well, you're a magician. And a couple of you are probably thinking, who was that blindfolded you and put you in the middle of a park in Singapore? To the last question, I have no answer. But in any case, for today's talk, I'm going to discuss the bird sounds that you hear in Singapore and around the world, what they mean to us, what they mean to the birds, and how we can go about documenting them. Now, I won't give you the answer to how to identify the pigeons by the way they fly yet. You're going to have to listen to me for the next 1.5 hours. It's going to be a long time for you and also for me as well. So please hang on. So today we are going to talk about seeing sounds and hearing feathers. In my talk, I will discuss contents of why birds call, how we can start remembering these bird calls, why we should know bird calls, how you can start recording bird calls by yourself, what these bird calls do for science, and of course the title of my talk, Hearing Feathers, Seeing Sounds, which you'll find out more about later. So first of all, why do birds call? There are many reasons why birds call, and the first thing that I can think of is to protect their territory. So this bird here is an oriental reed warbler. It's a migratory species to Singapore. They breed further up north in China, Japan, places around East Asia. When you go to places like crunchy marshes, places with marshland, you'll be able to hear this bird singing even in the winter time. So this is one of the very common calls that you hear when you go to crunchy marshes. They're basically saying, this winter territory is mine, I'm here to take all the food, I don't want you in my territory. Now, a lot of birds do this both in their wintering range and in their resident range. So another example of a bird that does this is a brown-throated sunbird. Now this species, I can guarantee that all of you have heard it before. Almost every morning, you would be able to hear this bird giving its very distinctive 水饺 call. So for those of you who don't know, 水饺 is dumpling in Mandarin. So often you will see this species perched at the top of trees early in the morning, singing out loud. It's always the males that are singing, you don't really see the females doing that. So, territory, one of the reasons why birds sing. Another purpose for bird songs is for advertisement and courtship. So, this species here is called the real rattler. We can't find it in Singapore, but it's a species that you can find elsewhere in Southeast Asia. What's happening here is that this male, the bird on the right, is singing to the female on the left. And you can see that the throat sac, that blue and red part. Oh, my cursor doesn't show up. Okay. Basically, that bluish, purplish part, it's expanding when it sings, and that's how it's trying to call towards the female. And it's got this very strange song. It almost, okay, I'm just going to play it first. So that very haunting one-note whistle that you hear, that's the song of the real rattler. The song of the real rattler is one that we describe as very ventriloquial. When you're actually in the forest and hear this sound, you can't really tell which part of the forest it's coming from. Is it from the left of the trail? Is it from the right of the trail? It's very difficult to figure out. And one of the reasons why is because when this bird sings, what it does is that it blows its throat up and it faces different directions. Another thing is that you can see when it calls towards a female, it opens up its wings and its tail, which I can't point to, but you can kind of imagine. It actually blows up to this weird shape, almost looks like a big square glowing in the forest. And a lot of birds combine their songs, their courtship songs, with different features such as dances or some wing flaps, and do these things to attract females. So these are territorial calls and advertisement courtship calls are basically the type of vocalizations that we usually refer to as songs. They're quite complex, they're quite complicated, they are usually vocalized during the breeding period. But sometimes it's a little bit hard for us to determine whether something is a territorial call or an advertising call. There's a lot of things about birds that we still don't really understand, especially here in Southeast Asia. So here I'm going to look at the same species again, the oriental reed warbler. I will play the first call on top, which is from Singapore first. So this song is sort of complicated, but it's really mostly just check, 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 in some high notes. I'm going to play the next recording that I took from Japan now. So I'm not sure if you can hear the difference intuitively, but the second song has more high notes, low notes, it's a little bit more complex. And no cursor. Do I have a laser pointer? No laser pointer. Okay. If you look at the song then, you can attempt to imagine the higher notes and the lower notes that are interspersing between the chart calls. So we don't really know directly about the oriental reed warbler, but in a similar species called the Eurasian reed warbler, we know that shorter, more simple calls are usually the territorial ones, and songs that have more low and high notes, and longer ones are the songs for courtship. So when we humans call and describe these vocalizations as songs, we don't fully really understand what the purpose of these songs are. The birds surely do, and these are a lot of the things that we still want to try to figure out. But generally, we just refer to them as songs. Some songs are a little bit more complicated. So this species is called the straw-headed bull. Many of you will probably have heard of this before. For those of you who haven't, this species is a critically endangered species. It used to range from Thailand all the way to Borneo, but today most of its range has shrunk, and Singapore is really one of the best places to see it. You can otherwise only find it at some very specially protected places in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. So the songs of this straw-headed bulbul is extremely special, and that's the reason why they are very, very heavily poached out, which has caused them to become critically endangered. So this is what the song sounds like. So what's actually happening here, I don't have a video unfortunately, but this song is actually sung by two birds. Two birds are alternating between the different notes in the songs, and they are creating this big melody. So what happens if it's a single bird singing? Sounds extremely lonely, doesn't know what to do. So oftentimes these straw-headed bulbuls, when you see them in pairs, you will see one bird trying to initiate the song, and then if the other one replies, then they will start singing in duets. We don't really know whether the male starts singing first or female starts singing first. These are all again things that we are still trying to figure out. So more examples of duets. This is a short-tailed babbler from the central catchment in Singapore. So it's a very strange sounding song, but what you can notice is that these notes have two songs coming out almost at the same time. So what happened when I recorded this call was that there were two birds. They were singing, duetting with each other. They were perched about 50 cm from each other. And one bird was just basically doing this while singing, and the other was looking at it, moving its wings around. Again, I have no idea what they were actually doing. It's probably some territorial call, or maybe they were just trying to get to know each other better. I don't really know. But what we do know is that a lot of these birds, especially in Southeast Asia, these species, this family of birds called babblers, they do a lot of duets. Now, duets are also very important for nocturnal birds. Owls, they don't get to see each other, but what they do is that they hear each other. So this over here is a Parkinson's fish owl from Hokkaido in Japan. So what you just heard was the male singing first, and then this bird, the female, singing afterwards. So essentially what happens is that the female is just perched on the lamppost, and every time the male sings, you just respond. Which I can imagine must be quite tiring for the female, because I can't imagine me having to do that. Honey, yes? Honey, yes? I don't think. So yes, duets is very important in birds also. Other types of calls. Contact calls. Where are you? I'm here. Which way should we go? I'm lost. I'm trying to find you. These are usually calls that are slightly more simple compared to the other songs that you know. So this is the contact call. This here is the contact call of this species called the Dorian starling. It's an extremely common migrant in Singapore. Every year you get thousands of them passing through Singapore. You can see huge flocks of them flying around some places in the evening. And you can hear that the recording I just played is much more simple compared to the songs that I played earlier on. Here's another example. This is the pinstripe babbler, a very common species in Singapore. When you walk around the forest in Singapore in the morning, you will hear this. This is a very common call in Singapore's soundscape, the pinstripe babbler's song. But when you see them in the day, when you observe flocks of them foraging together, the sounds that you hear is different. Not as melodious, it's much more simple. All you hear are some soft calls. So contact calls, typically they're much more straightforward. You tend to hear them a lot in insectivorous birds that are flocking together, or even mixed flocks of different species foraging together. Now, banging calls. This one, I think those of you here who are parents can imagine what it's like. It's extremely grating. A lot of birds, they have very similar banging calls. Here I'm going to play 3 different species. The first one is the magpie robin. Second one, the bamboo cuckoo. The third one, the goshawk. So many species of birds have these very grating banging calls. These calls are designed in such a way that they can attract the attention of their parents. So, you might be thinking, if I see a bird that's giving this sort of grating call, do I know for sure that it's banging, or could it just be some other adult bird that happens to have such a grating call? Well, in the previous example, I showed you the drum roll. Now, what happened a few seconds after this was this. The parent came and fed the bird. And what I want you to notice about this bird on the left is that it's got this fleshy gait. A lot of young birds have pale gait, which is the part at the base of their beak. And the purpose of this is so that the parents can aim where to put the food when they're feeding their kids. So sometimes you'll see a bird that's behaving in a way that's giving this grating call, they're fluttering their wings, and it has this fleshy gait. What you're observing is probably the bird giving its banging call. There are some other calls that are also very similar across many different species, and that is the alarm call. So what you're seeing here is a collared owlet, which is a small diurnal owl eating what I think is a puff-throated boo, which is a species of boo pretty much about the same size as this owlet. The owlet is really only slightly bigger than my hand. So I'm going to play the alarm call of a different species, not the one shown here. Two species I'll be playing. The first one is a pied fantail, which you can find in Singapore. The second one is the Asian glossy starling. Very similar sounding to each other. Now, sometimes you can have a situation where a lot of birds come together and give alarm calls together. This usually happens when there's a predator nearby, such as an owl, some raptor, a snake, and when that happens, what you get is a mob. So what's happening here is just really pure chaos. You have, I can't remember how many species of birds there were, probably 5, 6 or 7. There was also a squirrel, and they were all just jumping, running up and down the tree, screaming at something which I unfortunately couldn't find. But what you can realize is that a lot of these birds, the reason why the alarm calls are so similar is so that different species of birds will be able to recognize what it means. Imagine going to a country where you don't understand the language, and someone shouts, and it starts like running. Now nobody knows what I just said, but I actually shouted help in Japanese. Now when somebody shouts in such a way in the language you don't understand, you won't be able to understand what the words mean, but you will be able to infer the situation from the tone. And that's quite similar for these birds. By hearing those breaking calls from other species, they will be able to tell that there's a danger nearby, and everybody will be alerted to what the predator is. So these are just some examples of very basic, not basic, but a bunch of examples of call types that birds can give. Some birds have very special vocalizations. So this bird here is called a swiftlet. Everybody here has seen a swiftlet before. They are extremely common in Singapore. They're always flying around Singapore's airspaces. They are most famously known for their bird nest. So what you see on the left is a swiftlet on the nest, where you get all the bird nest soup and all the different bird nest products. It's actually the nest of these birds which are from their saliva. Now these birds in nature, they nest in caves, places that are completely dark. And what they do to navigate the caves is echolocation. Now, many of you probably know about bats being able to echolocate, use very high frequency sounds, and those high frequency sounds allow them to navigate through very fine spaces, very detailed places. The echolocation of these swiftlets are not as sophisticated. Unlike bats, you can actually hear them echolocating. So what they do is they give off these calls, they listen to the reflection, and try to find their way around their cave. Now this also means that the sophistication of their call isn't as good. If you put a pole in the middle of their way, they'll probably bang into it. But they'll be fine. So this picture here shows a swiftlet house from Indonesia. These buildings are very common across all of Malaysia, all of Indonesia, and the rest of Southeast Asia nowadays. They basically play the calls of these swiftlets to attract them to come and nest so that they can harvest their nest for the bird nest products. So, a quick recap. These are the bunch of vocalizations that I just described. And their purposes: territorial songs, courtship songs, contact calls, banging calls, alarm calls, and for swiftlets and orbit, which is another species of bird from the Americas, they can echolocate. There are many, many other different types of calls that birds can give. There are flight calls, there are some birds that do mimicry, some species like the drongos, leaf birds, can pretend to be other species, but I won't really go into that today. So different types of songs have different types of purposes. Now I know I just info-loaded all of you. There's just so much. How do I remember all these sounds? What do I do? I feel like giving up. Well, don't. And if you listen to my talk, you'll be able to try to remember these calls. So how do I remember bird songs? The way different people remember things, obviously, is going to be different. Some people remember more by seeing things, some people more by hearing things, some people more by doing things. But these are just some of the ways that I learned my calls. Now, there are some crazy people around. Some of them, they put the bird calls as their alarms, and they let it ring in the morning, and they're like, oh, this will help me remember. Those people are crazy. That was me, anyway. So I did that for a while, and I eventually learned to hate the Mandalay cuckoo, but yeah, I think I've grown out of it. You know those moments where you wake up in the morning and you're like groggy, and you go back to sleep, and the 5-minute nap feels like it was 2 hours, you have some weird dreams. Yeah, the Mandalay cuckoo is very, very frequently those dreams. I really hate it, so don't do that. So how do you get familiar with different types of calls? I'm just going to describe some of those right now. Some songs are very melodious. So the first one was the Oriental magpie robin. Many of you might know this from the cage bird trade, or hopefully from your bird watching sessions outside. They have extremely complex songs. They can do many different types of songs. They can learn songs. I've heard one pretending to be a sunbird before. It was extremely shocking. Now, these birds, the second one is the black-necked oriole, also very common in Singapore, probably one of the first songs that you'll be able to learn. They have very melodious songs, very musical, very nice to listen to in some sense. So I played 2 examples of melodious songs, but even between two, you can try to listen out for the difference in their tones. I'm going to play them again. And what I want you to listen for is how the word that I use is how thin or rich the bird calls sound. The tone of the bird songs are different. The second one is a little bit more creamy, a little bit more rich. So these are the sort of words that you can try to use to describe the bird songs that you hear and try to remember it. There are also other things that you can tell from these bird songs. So, oh no, it's red on red. Okay, I'm going to run to the screen. If you look at the sonogram, and look at this part where the note is going up, that's what we usually describe as an upward inflecting note. And if you look at those where the notes are going down, these are downward inflecting. And these are also, again, the sort of characteristics that you can try to remember in certain songs. Some species that's, for example, the black-capped babbler that's in Malaysia, there are some places where they exclusively give upward rising songs, some places where they exclusively give downward rising songs. Whereas other species, wherever you go, they will always give upward rising songs depending on what the song is. So those are just some of the vocabulary that might be useful for your learning. So, melodious songs. What about warbling songs? Now these are songs that are very complex, very fast, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, very tiring. So the tone of this bird's song also kind of sounds similar to the magpie robin in some sense, but it's so fast you can't really tell whether it's a melody or not. It's just up, down, 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 down. The birds in Singapore that you can hear giving such songs are things like white eyes. Can't really think of an example right now, but yes. And these white eyes you will also again hear quite frequently in Singapore. They're quite common in cage trade. They're also pretty common in Singapore's parks and gardens. This species, again, one that I can guarantee all of you have heard and seen before, the yellow-bellied boo. So my friend described this as heavy sounding R2D2. I didn't watch Star Wars, so I actually don't know what R2D2 is supposed to sound like. But these are some very bubbly calls. A lot of boobos have very similar songs. Some of them are more explosive sounding, some of them are more mild sounding, like this yellow-bellied boo. So when you go into the forests of Singapore, you encounter 3 different species of brown-colored, so to speak, boring-looking ones. Or leaf-wing boo, cream-vented boo, red-eyed boo, all of them have very similar sounds, but when you eventually listen to them closely, you can tell that the green lantern usually sounds a little bit more explosive, more powerful than the olive wing, and the red light a little bit more shrill. So, by learning these different sort of differences within the similar sounds, we can try to distinguish them. Nasal sounds. So those are 5 different species of woodpeckers: banded-laced, white-bellied, sunapini, and common flameback. The similarity, I think many of you will be able to hear between the sounds, they all have this very, very nasal sound. So many birds from the same family have similar sounding calls, but being able to identify at least what family you're listening to would help you to narrow down what you're listening to. So when we look at the sonograms of these calls, it actually tells us and kind of describes to us visually why they sound different. In this nasal call, you can see that there is a fundamental frequency over here, and a bunch of harmonics that are scattered up and down. But you can see the individual harmonics of the calls above and below the primary harmonic. There are some other sounds that kind of look similar but are way more messy, so to speak. So this is a harsh sounding call. I'm going to play it. So this was the Asian glossy starlings alarm call that I played earlier. Sorry. You can tell that it's very, very difficult to tell apart the different harmonics. It's so cluttered. There are so many sounds overlaid on top of one another. And that's what's giving it the very harsh sound. If you go back to the melodious songs earlier, you can see there aren't a lot of harmonics up and down. It's just one fundamental frequency that's dominating the space. And that's what's giving it a very creamy, nice, rich, and melodious musical sound. So by visualizing these different sounds, it would help you to try to remember, hopefully, how these different species sound like. So, quick recap. These are the basic sort of sound types that you would want to try to familiarize yourself with. Melodious ones, wobbling ones, bubbly ones, nasal ones, harsh ones. Of course, there are many, many different types of sounds, but it would help if you can try to remember these very common species first. Now, usually when you start remembering several common species, it will be easier for you to remember more things. Oh, this species sounds like a yellow-banded wool, but it's a bit slower. This species sounds like a chestnut-winged babbler, but it's a bit faster. Things like that. By having a reference point, you'll be able to remember more sounds by comparing against what you already know. So, why should you remember all these things? Why am I so crazy wanting to know all these things? Well, one of the first reasons why I wanted to remember sounds was because I wanted to find the birds that I was looking for. The banded bay cuckoo, I played it on my alarm so many times because I really wanted to see that bird. And I eventually saw a quiet one, so I didn't even know what I was trying to remember anyway. But when I go overseas and try to look for different species of birds, I always try to remember the songs so that when I'm walking around the forest, I'll be able to hear them first and then try to look for them. Oftentimes, you will hear the birds before seeing them. So there are some species of birds that are very scarce in Singapore. The chestnut-winged babbler, for one. I forgot to put the sound recording here, but it basically sounds like a very straightforward call. By remembering this call, you'll be able to walk around the central catchment forest and hopefully detect them by sound before you do by sight. Remembering calls is also very useful for identifying birds. These two species over here, pale-legged leaf warbler and succulent leaf warbler, they look the same to non-bird watchers, they also look the same to bird watchers. In fact, if you catch them, you still can identify them. The only way you can identify them in the wintering grounds is by listening to their call. In fact, I flipped the two birds around over here. The succulent leaf warbler is labeled pale-legged and pale-legged is labeled succulent, but it doesn't even matter because they're the same. But their calls are slightly different, and I'm going to play that now. So, what I'm playing here is two sound recordings interspersed above each other. The pale-legged one is the higher sounding call, the succulent is the lower sounding call. people can hear the difference. Teet, 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 teet. Now, when we look at the sonogram of what it sounds like, it looks almost impossible to tell them apart. The one on the left is the pale little leaf warbler with the higher frequency. The one on the right is the Sakani leaf warbler. And when you hear them isolated from one another, it can be quite difficult to distinguish them unless you're familiar. But by being able to record these sounds, you can always go back and try to put them on a sonogram like that, and then you can identify what the bird you saw in the field was. Knowing bird songs is also very important to recognize the patterns around you. Now, if you go to temperate countries, you'll be able to identify seasons just by what you're wearing. Unless you're wearing short sleeves in the winter, then something is wrong with you. But in the summer, a lot of birds are singing. It feels very lively. In the summer, it's actually hot. In autumn, a lot of the leaves are dropping from trees, and in the winter, you are freezing. But in the tropics, it's a lot different from that. It's very difficult to tell about seasonality. In Singapore, it's either wet or wetter. But by knowing how birds sing and when they sing, you'll be able to distinguish patterns between them. So, this is a result from a study published by my colleague that basically looked at how and when different birds were nesting based on information such as when nesting was observed, when juveniles were observed. And what we can infer is that many of these birds will probably be singing before they start nesting. The reason is because that's when they are trying to protect their territory, that's when they're trying to court the females. So, by knowing what sounds to look out for, you'll be able to tell, oh, around December, the brown-throated sunbird tends to sing quite a lot. But when it goes to, say, May, it's a little bit quieter. Around March, the short-tailed feathers tend to sing a lot more. But when it goes to July, they're quite quiet. Things like that you wouldn't really think of if you don't bother listening to these sounds. You'll be able to notice when you learn them. You'll be able to become a better bird watcher, a better naturalist. So, one of the best ways to remember bird songs is by going out, listening, paying attention, and trying to record them. This is especially important when you listen to sounds that you don't recognize. You record it, you go back, you try to identify it. But many of you probably have the impression that recording gears are extremely expensive. Now, they are not the cheapest of things, I would say. These are some of the budget lower-ended portable recorders. I'm not sponsored by any of these, by the way, unless one of you wants to sponsor me. But the Zoom H1N, the Tascam VR05 are some of the cheaper and relatively good sound recorders that people use. Now, these sound recorders are attached with mics. The two ears that you see coming out are the mics, but they are not exactly very sensitive. So when the bird is singing from somewhere far away, you might not be able to pick it up just with a portable recorder. So what people usually combine this with are mics. So these ones are called shotgun mics. They basically allow you to record sounds from a very directional point. They're not the cheapest of things, and you wouldn't really want to buy a budget one either because then the quality will be compromised. There are some people who go one step further. They use these parabolic mics. It almost looks like a walk. Now these mics are even better than shotgun mics. Even if your bird is very far away, you will still be able to get some form of usable sounds. So it all seems quite over the top, right? But you don't really need all these things to start sound recording. All you need is your phone. Maybe not a Nokia phone, but a smartphone. With a smartphone, you'll be able to record a lot of the sounds. It will be good enough for you to try to go back and identify them. You will actually still be able to edit them most of the time if the birds are close enough. But some of you who might want to take this more seriously, but not to the extent of buying a recorder yet, can consider using a smartphone and combining them with these sort of small mics. So this Rode mic over here is really just the size of like this pointer. It's super compact, super portable. It's very easy to lose it, so it's fantastic. But you can combine it with a phone, very, very light, very easy to use. So, a quick recap. You don't need expensive gear to go out to record birds. You can really just use the phones, go out there, start recording all the things around you, and have fun. But it's quite difficult to go out and start a new hobby, start a new passion without really knowing how to do something. So how do I probably record bird sounds? Just yesterday I was looking at my text to my partner, and then I found a message from, I think it was January this year, where I was going, oh my god, all my sound recordings from Thailand are gone. I think it turns out when I was on a trip at Thailand, I was not recording anything. So I took my recorder, I thought I'd turn it on, and I'm doing this, waiting for 2 minutes because the thing is singing, but I was actually doing nothing. My recorder was not on, and I was doing that for like 4 days. So what's very, very important when you're out there recording things is to make sure you actually are recording something. The more sound to record, generally, the better. Now, I'll discuss this a little bit more later, but basically, data points are extremely important. If a bird is singing for 2 minutes, don't just record the first 10 seconds. Try to record as much as you can. 10 bouts of the song, 12 bouts of the song, the whole 2 minutes, as much as you can. The reason why this is also important is sometimes the birds will do a very normal song and then suddenly do something else. They will change the song halfway through. And if you stop your recording, you won't be able to capture the change. You won't be able to capture what the bird was actually doing. The third thing, annotating recordings. This is super duper important. I'm going to talk more about this now. So, when I go out and record my bird sounds, I'll point my mic at the bird stops singing, then I'll point the mic to myself, and I'll start singing. I'll basically start talking about many different things that I observed and captured on the spot. The most important thing is, what was the bird? If you're on a bird watching trip, you see 50 species, you record 12 species. On the spot, you know what you're looking at, you know what you're recording. You go home 2 weeks later, you look at the recordings, you're like, oh my god, is this yellow-vented boo or leafing boo? I cannot remember. So it's super important, after you record, you say, yellow-vented boo. Talk into your mic, so that when you go back and listen to your recordings, you know what the recording actually was. Sometimes, you're recording a bird and there are other birds singing in the background. Like over here, the Eurasian wren is going, ah, and the Japanese robin is going, ah. The Japanese robin will also be captured in your sounds. What you want to do is to say, Eurasian wren calling, and in the background, the Japanese robin. This again is so that when you go back, you know what you were listening to. This is also super important. Did you definitely see the bird calling? Sometimes, there's a bird singing on the tree. You know that the bird is somewhere on the tree. But then you see another species flying by, perches in front of it, and you're like, oh, that's probably the one that's singing instead. What can happen? Like in this case, if the blue and white flycatcher is standing in front of the Eurasian wren, you might think, oh, this song belongs to the blue and white flycatcher. But that's actually not the case. It's actually the Eurasian wren that's calling. So it's very important for you to note whether you really saw the singing bird or not. Otherwise, you're going to have a wrong ID. Next thing, where were you? Again, if you're on a long trip, a 2-week trip, you go to many different places around the country, you can't remember where you saw what, when you saw what. Again, these are things that you need to make sure you keep note. This, I think, is extremely important also. What was the bird doing? Was it a solo bird singing? Was it a male bird? Was it a female bird? Was it jumping around? Was it dancing? Was it doing weird things? What sort of behavior was it exhibiting? These, again, are very important because some vocalizations are only associated with certain behavior. For example, this species of woodpecker called the landed woodpecker, there's a certain call type that I have only heard when there are at least 3 or more birds socializing together. And these are information that you might overlook if you don't properly annotate your recordings. So, go overboard is fine. The bird was perched on a log that's 50 cm from the ground, pointing left, and then there was an oriole flying by, and you looked up. All this information might one day become important when you try to look back at your recordings. Other stuff, how high were you? What's your elevation? In Singapore, it doesn't really matter, because the highest point is not even the mountain, it's a building. But elsewhere, when you go to places where you have species, compositions changing from the lowlands to the highlands, you will want to know how high you were, because certain birds, you might be recording them at elevations that you're not expecting. And these, again, are information that's very important. So after you annotate all these recordings, you have all the sounds, you go back home, you run through, edit them. The software that I use is this free one called Audacity. There are, of course, many other softwares out there, but I think this is the one that's quite popular among bird recordists. Now, it's quite similar to taking pictures, recording sounds. When you go out and take a picture, the environment is completely dark, there are leaves blocking, there's somebody who's inconsiderate standing in front of you, so you get half the bird. No matter what you try to do, you can never salvage that photo. it's similar for sound recordings, and especially in Singapore. This, oh my goodness, it's a nightmare. I can't remember what species this is, but it's just, it doesn't even matter because it's so full of noise. There's mechanical noise, there's footsteps, there's some rumbles, there's a lot of cicada. It's quite difficult to take good sound recordings depending on where you go, urban areas especially. But at the same time, this is actually part of the soundscape where the bird belongs in. So I think it's probably impossible to get a nice sound recording of a Java miner in Singapore. Everywhere you go, sawa, sawa, there'll be some auntie shouting in the background, there'll be some ambulance going by, but that's where the bird is. That's part of the environment. So you really want a balance between only getting the bird songs and also getting a mix of what the environment of the bird sounds like. So, another thing that's super important, when you bring back all your sound recordings home, you need to catalog it properly. How many birds did you actually record? Now, sometimes when you go to online platforms and you look at recordings that were uploaded by other people, you see things that don't really make sense. Over here, this recordist is uploading 4 recordings from 3 p.m. at the same place on the same day. I don't know how this person walked time, but this person recorded 133 seconds within 1 minute. Now, these are things that are very, very problematic. When you do research, you want to make sure that the data you use are reliable. Over here, there are so many things that I can't tell. Were these 4 recordings from the same individual? Were they from different birds? Were they actually doing different things? There's absolutely no idea. You can have 2 Eurasian wrens singing at the same place. You can record the same bird twice, once at 2, once at 2:25. You could be recording 2 different birds at 2 different timings, or maybe you could record the first bird, walk away, make a loop, come back. You're not sure whether the second bird you recorded is the first or second individual. These are, again, all information that you need to annotate properly in your recordings. Otherwise, the precious sound recordings that you record won't be usable for other people. So, it's a bit scary, the next slide I'm going to show you, but this is basically the data set that I have. It's an Excel sheet of the sound recording, where I saw it, what time I saw it, when I saw it, other observations that I noted on the spot. It seems very daunting at first, but once you start doing your own sound recording, you realize this is actually very commonsensical. All the basic information that you capture on the spot, you have to make sure you properly annotate them and store them. Sharing these sound recordings online, there are many, many different platforms. Zenocanto is one of the main places where a lot of bird watchers upload their songs. There are other, you can also upload mammal sounds and I think orthopteran sounds on Zenocanto. And then there's Macaulay Library by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is the lab that runs eBird and Merlin, which many of you are probably familiar with. And there's also iNaturalist, which is not as popular for birds. So a quick recap. Proper cataloging of the sound recordings, super, super important. Otherwise, all the precious sound recordings that you took, they will not become useful. So how exactly are the sound recordings that you record useful for science? How do we even use them? What can we use them? One of the ways that we can use the data is for species delimitation. I'm going to go back to the Atkinson's fish owl recording. Okay, so this is the same owl from just now. The male sings and the female sings immediately afterwards. Now, one of my colleagues, Moving, he worked on this species of Atkinson's fish owl, and he realized that the birds that are in this red part of the map and the birds that are in the green part of the map actually have different sounding duets. So the left one, the left sonogram is the one that I just showed you, the example that I just showed you. The male sings and the female sings immediately afterwards. The one on the right, you can see a much wider space between the first 2 notes and the right 2 notes. Now these information suggests that the birds that live on these different parts of the range map are actually possibly different species. If you put them together, they probably wouldn't recognize each other. Information like that can only be inferred if you have enough sample sizes of good sound recordings. There are many, many other species in the region that have been studied through vocalizations. The tit babbler that you can find in Singapore previously was used to be known as the striped tit babbler. It ranged from Indochina all the way to Borneo. But recently we know that the Bornean birds actually sound different. And what's very interesting is that this difference in sound record, their songs, are corroborated by genomic evidence. So we know that songs are really very useful information to delimit species. The Sunda brush cuckoo that you can find in Singapore previously was known as the rusty-breasted cuckoo. Again, we know that this complex comprises multiple species. That's in Papua, Philippines, Sundaland, that's over here. The white-chested babbler, today known as Malayan swamp babbler, it used to be in Singapore, but it's now extinct. But likewise, the species that's in Peninsular Malaysia and Borneo, they used to be thought to be the same, but now we know are different. How else can we use songs to our advantage? So what I'm showing here is a little bit complicated, but essentially, this is a work by, again, one of my colleagues, Laura. She recorded the bird sounds in Singapore using many passive acoustic monitors. It's actually a big box of a recorder. She left it in the forest for like a few months, and it captured all the sounds that was happening around it. When she analyzed the data, she noticed that she captured a lot of bird sounds, but at the same time, she captured a lot of cicada sounds as well. And when she looked into the patterns between the cicada bird calls and the cicada calls and the bird calls, she realized that a lot of birds actually stop singing when cicadas start singing. Now this is, again, kind of intuitive when you think about it. Imagine being in a quiet room, you're speaking to your friend, and then all of a sudden you walk into an open space and it's so noisy, you can't hear your friend anymore, your friend can't hear you anymore. There's just no point communicating. It's quite similar for these birds. When they wake up in the morning, they sing la la la. The sun goes up, becomes hot, the cicadas go ah, and they basically stop singing because there's just no point anymore. But again, these observations don't apply across all species. Some species have songs that are lower frequency, so they don't overlap with the cicadas. Those birds are less affected by the cicada calls. Whereas other species, their calls really just overlap perfectly, and they go, you know what, I leave up. So, let me come to the second part of my title, hearing feathers. So far, I've really just talked about what birds make, the sounds that birds make from their beaks, their vocalizations. But what about non-vocal characters? Do these non-vocal communications have any meanings? What about the pigeons that I was talking about in the introduction? Do these flappings have any meanings? This bird here is called the Latham snipe. I had the chance to observe it in Hokkaido last year. When I observed this bird, I had goosebumps, and I'm going to play the song of this bird first, and then explain why. So what I want you to imagine is this snipe flying around the air, and then diving all of a sudden. When it dives, it opens its wing, its tail feathers out like this. Now towards the last part of the song, you will have heard this sound. The "oh" sound, that's not coming from the beak, that's coming from the tail. It's ridiculous. It's very hard to play the sound from a speaker, but when you're in the field, it's almost like you can feel the vibration of the air around you. There are like 5, 6 birds just dive bombing all around you, and you hear this very weird whirling coming. It was a very mind-blowing experience for me, and this is really when I started thinking about hearing feathers. A lot of the times when we go out, we listen to the birds sing. They're happily singing along, but we don't really pay attention to the other sounds that the birds make. And then I started thinking about pigeons. For the past 10 years or so, every time I walk around and I flush a pigeon, I've been able to identify it intuitively, but I never really knew why. And then I started thinking about what really is it that makes them sound different. So I'm going to play the different pigeons flapping now. Okay, that's the spotted dove. This is the pink-necked winged pigeon. I know many of you must be thinking I'm crazy to be saying that they're different, but don't worry, let me get there. And then this is the zebra dove. I'm gonna play them one by one. Okay, sorry. Okay, here we go. I don't know whether you are able to tell the difference, I hope so. Let me play it one more time. Okay, the first one, you will hear a sort of medium pitched whirl coming along. The second one, the pin and green pigeon, is more of a rustling sound. And the third one, the zebra dove, you want to pay attention to this wee 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 sound. Okay, three different pigeons, three different type of flight sounds. So, this is the part where I don't really know how to give my speech because I don't know what on earth these sounds mean. In preparation for this talk, I did a lot of research trying to find out whether there's actually work done on how birds make sounds with their wings. And what we do know is that for some pigeons, this is a group of pigeons from the Americas, it's been noted that they too have special wing feathers that are designed to make these weird whirling sounds. But scientists don't know what on earth they're for. Because a lot of these pigeons, they don't particularly use their wings to do any courtship dance or do any territorial displays. But the sounds are often made when they fly. And when these sounds are made when they fly, other pigeons around that bird will recognize those sounds and know that there is a danger. Scientists have done experiments. They recorded this flapping sound, they play it back to a pigeon, and the pigeon goes, and they fly off. They can recognize what the sounds mean. But are these pigeons making those sounds on purpose? Is it voluntary? Is it involuntary? We've got no clue. Why on earth would they have such adaptations simply for the purpose of alerting people, not people, alerting pigeons around them? It's not really intuitive. And this is a field that's really very poorly known. Sound as a communication tool, it sometimes works voluntarily. I'm speaking to you, you'll be asking questions to me later. But if I start running out of the door, you would hear my footsteps, and many of you will go, oh, there's something going on. But I'm not making those footsteps with the purpose of telling you that I'm running out. Those are involuntary sounds that are a result of my running. With these pigeons, we really have absolutely no clue what's going on. But now you know that at least they have different sort of sounds, and you can try to perhaps pay attention to these sounds when you're out there next time. So, I'm 1 hour into my talk and I have half an hour more, but this is going to be the end of my talk. A big recap of what I talked about over the past hour. Why the birds call? What do these different bird calls mean? You know, territorial sounds, courtship sounds. We've talked about different types of bird sounds. Some more harsh sounding ones, more melodious sounding ones, and how you can hopefully go out and try to remember them. How you can record these bird sounds. Just using a mobile phone, make sure you annotate those information that you have when you're out there. Describe what you're watching, whether it's a male, female, what it's doing, where you are, how many birds there are. These are all very important. We've also discussed what these bird calls tell us. And lastly, we've learned that basically I came here talking about something I completely don't know. I know that the pigeons can be told about by their sound, but I don't know why. I don't know what they're doing. But maybe one day, when you are blindfolded and placed in the middle of a park somewhere in Singapore, you could be able to figure it out. Thank you. Too fast. For the next half an hour, you all can either leave or ask me questions.
Oops, sorry for that. Any questions from the audiences? Oh, there's a question here.
Hello, thank you for the call. Maybe I just want to know not so much about song. You know, in Singapore, there's a lot of birds that's making noise. And I noticed that birds like to, if you may call it singing, singing before dawn, and they all sing together, different species. Yeah, and do you know why? And secondly, maybe it's related to the first part. For example, crow, they like to congregate in some, example, HDB block, car park on the tree, and they make a lot of noise. Also, it's before dawn. And I think this bird doesn't care whether other birds are singing this. Before dawn is like everybody is singing.
So,
can you shed some light on it?
Yeah. What you are describing is called the dawn chorus. Maybe I'll explain backwards. So in the day, it gets too hot. Birds are not very active. So this means that they want to maximize as much time they can before the conditions become unfavorable for them. There are other things like the cicadas that I mentioned earlier on. These cicadas also tend to start calling when it gets hotter, maybe around midday or so. So because of that, in order to try to sing as much as they can, protect as much of the territory they can, call as many females as they can, and find food. Go look around, look for places that have fruits or insects. What they want to do is to maximize those time and sing as early as they can. Now, for us, dawn might seem to be a completely dark condition. If you walk around the forest in the dawn time, you will probably bang into a tree. But the birds wouldn't. They are able to see better than us in those conditions, and that allows them to start their day before us. So that's about the first part, why birds sing before dawn. That's basically their daybreak. But the second part about crows, now that's a little bit different, I think. Different species of birds have different characteristics. Some species are very solitary. They pretty much live their whole life alone or with their pair only. Other species are very, very social. So like the Java mynas you see around, the sparrows you see around, and the crows also, they're super social. So early in the morning, they're all together, because what these crows do is that they will all roost to sleep together. They are very, very social. So in the evening before, they will all congregate at one tree, sleep together. Next morning, they're still on the same tree, they haven't dropped off. So they're all like, oh, good morning, good morning, good morning, okay, let's go out and eat. And they go out, they will scatter to different places, they'll forage. This one go to Bukit Batok, now go to Choa Chu Kang, I go Bukit Panjang, I bite that lady, you bite that man. Okay, we eat from different kopitiam. Then we all come back in the evening, sleep together at the same place. That's how they socialize, that's how they exchange information. Some of these birds, I think what we have learned over the past years is that they can tell information such as where food is, things like that we obviously wouldn't be able to figure out just by listening. They can communicate with each other. Bird songs are a lot more complex than what we think they are. Some species of birds, like this group of birds called tits, they have the way their songs are structured. It's in different syllables, so like t. What we know is that by rearranging these different syllables, they can convey different information. So this, again, is a very, very social species, and although they are not as loud as the crows, you probably observe something similar in the morning and in the evening. They all be together. It's just that it doesn't sound as scary as the crows are. So many birds actually do that. The crows stand out because they are super big and super loud, and also probably because we don't really like them.
Any other questions from the audience?
Thanks for the very nice talk. I was quite curious about this pigeon flapping stuff, and I was thinking of other birds with characteristic flapping, so for example, hornbills. So I was wondering if either you or are you aware of any other studies which have attempted to record this in other birds or quantify it?
One paper that I read yesterday was from flycatchers, tyrant flycatchers. I think it was 4 flycatchers. So this species, there is a migratory race in South America. It migrates north towards Central America, and in Central America, there's also a resident one. So basically 2 different populations of the same species. Now what researchers found was that these 2 different populations that come to the same place, they have different primary lengths, and that causes the sounds that they make when they flap to be different. So it seems that these wing sounds are produced when they attack animals. So what the researchers did was that they placed a plushie of a sparrow or something, and the flycatchers went and smack it. And they do know that the sounds are produced when certain behaviors are observed, when they are aggressive or when they are doing courtship. But it's not known whether it's voluntary or whether it's involuntary. That's the part that's still a question mark. So the hornbills that you mentioned, woodpeckers also, I think they have a very distinct flight sound. For those, I'm not aware of works that have been conducted on them as of now. But I think they would really be very, very interesting to look at. The hornbills especially, it's so distinct, the sounds, For those of you who eventually get or have been to other places in Southeast Asia to bird watch, there's this species called the reef hornbill that you would definitely hear before you see, because they are ridiculously loud. You're like, what is going on? And then the hornbill flies across. Again, no idea. But maybe it might be a signal to other reef hornbills that I'm coming towards you. We don't really know at this point.
There's a question at the back.
Hi, are there birds that don't make calls or which calls outside the audible range of human hearing?
Outside the audible range, I think I have, but I can't remember, sorry. I know I've heard from somebody that it exists, but I don't know enough to answer that. But I don't think there are birds that don't call. So, earlier when we discussed territorial behavior and courtship behavior, a lot of those are for birds that primarily use their voice to attract their mates. There are many other species that use their feathers instead. How pretty they are. How extravagant they are. Things like peafowls, for example, they make choices based on the number of eye spots, right? But even those birds do make sounds at some point in their life. So I don't think that like mute birds, so to speak. But I might be wrong. I don't think so.
Why does a white-bellied sea eagle sound like a duck?
Wow, it's time you need to ask them. Okay. So I'm gonna answer the question in a roundabout way, okay? There's this group of birds in Papua called, oh my god, what are they called? I suddenly forgot the name. Okay, there's a group of birds in Papua and some birds here in Southeast Asia. They look super duper similar. They are completely unrelated. They sound very, very similar also. When you think about the amount of possible sounds that you can create in the natural world, it's quite limited, isn't it? There's only so much creativity that you could possibly have. Meaning, if you make a sound, it's either going to sound like a whistle or a trill or a harsh call, something that can be categorized into something. The white-bellied sea eagle doesn't give its call in such a way because it wants to sound like a duck. But what I think is happening is that they coincidentally sound like ducks, and that is the sound that we can recognize them most as. Meaning, to the white-bellied sea eagles, they sound like white-bellied sea eagles because they know what they sound like. But to us, the reference point we have is a duck. That's the most similar sounds that we know. And that's probably why, to us, the white-bellied sea eagle sounds similar to a duck. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question very well over here. It's a bit abstract. But essentially, you can't make, there's kind of a limit to the amount of sounds that can be produced in the natural world. And at some point, you're going to have similarities just by coincidence. I hope that answers the question.
Hi, thank you for the very informative talk and all the different sounds. My little one enjoyed it. Do you recommend any nature park in Singapore where I can bring him to listen to the birds?
Oh, yes. So, I think what's going to be important is listening to the birds and also seeing the birds. If you go to the Central Catchment Nature Reserve in Singapore, you will hear a lot of things. You will see none of them. Really, if you walk through Rifle Range in the morning, you hear banded woodpeckers, hill miners, chestnut-winged feathers, short-winged, so many things singing. But because it's so dense, so dark, the birds are high up, you can't see them, and that's not exactly the most enjoyable experience for somebody who is new. So the kind of places that I would recommend is really just the neighborhood parks, botanic gardens, for example, Jurong Lake Gardens. Those are places with a high diversity of species. A lot of birds are singing, and it's easy to see them. So that way you'll be able to associate the sounds that you hear with the birds that you're actually seeing.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the talk. I have a question. I think as a former educator, I have kids who actually ask this very simple-minded question, but makes me think also. Do birds understand one another? Because there was a hike that we went to Singapore Quarry, and there's the stock-billed kingfisher as well as the, what's the other kingfisher?
White-throated?
White-throated kingfisher, yeah. So, I don't know whether it's coincidental or not, but they seem to be singing to each other. Yeah, so I was wondering whether they understand one another. Yeah.
I would think the answer is yes. So, many different species of birds that are occupying a similar niche. Basically, they eat similar food, they like to live in similar places. One species likes to live in a tree canopy, the other also likes to live in a tree canopy. These birds compete with each other. Now, when you compete with something, you have to recognize what the competition is. So in the case of the kingfishers that you observed, both of them are within the quarry. Both of them want territory within the quarry. They want to eat the fishes within the quarry. And because of their similarities, they know each other, they can see each other, they can probably hear and recognize each other as well. And I'm quite sure they don't understand what each other is saying, but they can at least recognize and acknowledge that something is present. So for the kingfishers, I think yes, for sure. I'm going to give a slightly different example again of how I think birds really understand what other birds are. So this is an experience I had when I was in Japan. I was watching a flock of gulls just at a random neighborhood park, like 50 of them just sitting around. And this bird of prey called an osprey flew over. For those of you who don't know, the osprey is this big eagle that eats fish only. They have a very, very characteristic shape. Their wings are super long, very rectangular. The osprey flew by, the gulls, they didn't care. 5 to 10 minutes later, all of a sudden, all the gulls just fly. And I'm like, what on earth is going on? And I'm trying to look for the potential cause of it. And then I see a sparrowhawk hunting. The sparrowhawk, this is a species that eats mammals, eats birds. It's a danger to the gulls. So the gulls, they were able to recognize the shape of the osprey and the shape of the sparrowhawk just by looking up, oh, they're one wing long, they're not dangerous. Or this one wing very short, wow, coming towards us, fly. They can recognize, they can understand what's around them in such aspects. So, do they understand? Do I know that that bird is giving its territorial call? Probably not. But I know that that is that species. I know that I should be careful of it. In that way, they do understand.
Thanks for the informative talk and the cute presentation. My question is more of, are there, in terms of the sounds and the songs, right, within a species, are they always similar? Is there any individuality, and how does that affect?
Sorry, what are you asking within a species or
Within the
across?
species, is there any individuality, like individual birds, these kind of sounds like
Yes, the answer is yes. So, kingfishers, for example, white-throated kingfisher in Pasir Ris, white-throated kingfisher in Choa Chu Kang. Sounds the same to me, sounds the same to you. But there was this work that was done, I think it was in the Americas, where they recorded a bunch of different kingfishers on the same species. Sorry, I can't remember which species, but a bunch of individuals. And they put it through, they basically analyzed the calls. And what they found was that every individual kingfisher has a slightly different pattern, slightly different, for example, like the length of the first note, length between the first and second note. The patterns of the songs were different between the different individuals, even though they sound so similar to us. So there's that study that, at least for kingfishers, we know that there's individuality in that. And then there's also the example of the penguins. You have a penguin colony with a million birds. The parents go out to feed, they come back, everybody, but they can hear which one their chick is, they know which one. They go straight to their chick and they feed it. So definitely there's individuality in there that we can't recognize, but they can.
Thank you for the talk. I'm a beginner bird watcher, and I was hoping that learning to use sounds can help me to find the bird more easily, but I still find it very difficult. Like, I hear a lot of sounds, but when I look, it's just leaves. So like, do you have any tips for that? And then my second question is, why does the greater red-tailed drongo mimic other birds?
Okay, I answer the first question first. So, there's this technique called triangulation. Let's say I am standing here, and is there something I can throw? Throw my wallet. Okay. It's gonna make a sound from there. Imagine that's the bird. What I usually do when I'm out bird watching and I'm trying to find a bird is, I'll stand at one place, I'll try to listen to where the bird is, and then I'll move a few steps. I'll come here, I'll draw my wallet again from this side. And I draw an imaginary line from where I was and where I am. And kind of cross like that. And using that, you can try to pinpoint where the bird is singing. You can do this to try to get the angle of the bird, where it is with respect to you horizontally and also vertically. So when the bird is singing, what I actually do in the field is I'll move my head up and down, move it left and right. See where the sound becomes even between my left and right ears. And then I'll be able to figure out the bird is this direction. So that's how you try to pinpoint where the bird is singing from. But having said that, there are some birds that are just impossible to see. Sometimes there's this species of bird called the goose frogmouth. It's this nocturnal bird that you can find elsewhere in Southeast Asia. Such a pain in the ass to see that bird. There was this one night I was in Taman Negara. I was with my friends, not me alone. 2 people. We know the bird is singing from this big tree. We walk around. 2 hours till you're gonna find a bird. Sometimes it's just like that. But usually in Singapore, that's generally not the case. There aren't that many species here that are so stationary. So if you just stand there, look towards the correct direction, hopefully the bird will move, and then you can try to find it. That's the technique. So it does take a bit of practice, but it's quite fun when you actually get to, nail the technique right. The second one about drongos. I don't think I can explain exactly why that happened. We do know that drongos as a family, they are very clever. We know that they can recognize the environment around them probably much better than other species do. I can't explain how they got to that stage as a species, but wait, the question is why they make so many sounds, right? Why are they making other birds? Okay. So one of the reasons, or one of the functions that have been found about these drongos is that they can mimic other birds to start mixed flocks. So mixed flocks are basically a phenomenon where a bunch of different species of insectivorous birds look for food together. Sometimes you can have 10, 20, 30 species of different birds just combing through the tree, very, very noisy, all of them feeding on worms, different sorts of insects. different species in the mixed flocks have different functions. Some species, they forage by gleaning. That means they'll flip every leaf, check what's underneath, flip every leaf, check what's underneath. Some other birds, what they do is they hunt by sailing. They perch on a branch, they find an insect, they fly, they catch, they come back. So by foraging in the mixed flock, you have a lot of advantage. It's much easier to find food, and it's also much easier to detect predators. If one bird sees an owl, it will start screaming, everybody can run off together. Drongos have been observed to mimic other birds to start mixed flocks. So they pretend to be something else, everybody's like, hey, there's people feeding here. They will come, and then they will all start foraging. So the drongo benefits. You can just follow them, got free food, got predator around you. That's one of the reasons. They have also been observed to mimic predator sounds. So it's a bunch of other things foraging, they pretend to be an eagle, they run away, or free food for me. You know, these are the sort of things that drongos seem to understand, and they can do it, and other birds don't have the ability to do so. I have personally also observed drongos mimicking macaques. I have no idea why they're doing that. It's just super weird. I was just walking through an island. I know that there's a bunch of macaques, and I know that there's a drongo giving the drongo call, the very metallic sounding call. But the moment the drongo saw me, it changed its call. It started sounding like a macaque. It was probably alarmed by me, but I really have no clue why or what was happening. I just know that that is what I observed. So surely there must be some function or reason to that also, but there's still a lot that we really, really don't know.
Hey, maybe just a follow-up question to that. So when they mimic and all the sonograms, the technology, can they differentiate between the fake one and the real one?
I would think yes, in the sense, I think experienced bird watchers will be able to tell them apart by sound, like the way the drongo sounds. So in Singapore especially, the drongos tend to mimic the changeable hawk eagle. I actually have the call here. Let me play it, hopefully loud enough. Nope, that's an effect, sorry. It's a bit soft, but it's the one that goes okay. Not the best recording. But when drongos copy other birds, you can tell that it's a drongo because of the tone of the sound. So at the start I talked about how some birds sound whistly, some birds sound bubbly. The drongos in particular, they have a very metallic sounding call. So from that, you can already tell by ear that it's not the actual bird that it's copying. Once you put that through the spectrogram, you will be able to tell also because you know the patterns I mentioned about the harmonics and things like that, those will differ between the actual bird and the drongo. But of course, some of them really do it very, very well. There was one experience I had in dairy farm. Lucky was got drongo calling, got greater green leaflet copying the drongo. Wow, I cannot tell how you know. They really sound the same. And that was when I just went like, oh my god, next time I walk in the forest, I hear a drongo. It might not even be a drongo. Sometimes when you walk around the forest and you're like, oh, I can't identify that, must be a drongo, must be a drongo. It could even be a leaflet copying a drongo. It's that complicated sometimes. So yeah, short answer, probably can tell. Complicated answer, maybe not.
I think we only have time for one last question before we have to end talk.
Thanks, Keita. Well, my main question would be, for Singapore being so urbanized, do we have any evidence of our birds being affected by noise pollution and light pollution? Because I've noticed in many instances we have collar kingfishers calling at 12 midnight, changeable hawk eagles calling immediately through the night. I don't know why. Like, that's what they do.
Okay. So the first part, whether there's evidence, short answer, no. I think even if they try to do research today, we won't be able to do it. Because everywhere in Singapore is already so polluted by noise. It's already at a stage where it's impossible to study within Singapore the effects of noise pollution. If you want to do something like that, you have to compare Singapore to, say, a separate plot in Malaysia where it's quieter. So there's no direct evidence of the effects of noise and light pollution in Singapore. Elsewhere, yes. So there are studies from, well, actually a lot of places where birds that are singing near roads, for example, if their calls are at a very low frequency, similar to the rumbling of vehicles, they have to adjust it upwards or downwards depending on the species. So if you compare Singapore 200 years ago and now, I'm sure confirmed got impact. The second part about birds singing, calling at night, I actually don't think that's a Singapore thing. I noticed that these collared kingfishers singing at night, or other species singing at night, it tends to happen around the breeding period. And what I suspect is that they are probably on high alert. Whatever it is that they think is threatening their nest, they will be alarmed by it. And the reason why I infer that is because you don't hear these birds calling throughout the year, right? It's always usually certain times of the year. Suddenly collared kingfisher calling everywhere. Then 1 month later, no more. From that, I think it's not an impact of the noise and light pollution, but it's probably their actual breeding cycle that's causing them to behave that way. There are some species, some families, in fact, cuckoos, for example, they are quite well known for singing throughout the night. I don't know if it's xiao or what, but they really want to express their territory in the day and also at night. I don't know why. Some birds just do that long.
Testing. Yeah. Okay. Ren, thank you for your questions, and the presentations. So, just one last question for me. So, do you have any tips for new folks that wants to take up this hobby?
Visit singaporebirds.com. Okay, no, on a more serious note. My advice would be go out, really, go out. It's impossible to learn about birds from books. It's impossible to learn about birds from the website. You really need to go out and see the birds for yourself, hear the birds for yourself, and that's the best way you can learn, it's really through experience. And of course, when you're out there, it's quite common to feel lost. I don't know where to go, I don't know where to find the birds. But Singapore, a lot of bird watchers. I think more than 3,000. You go to any of the popular parks, you will definitely see photographers. Just ask them some questions. So what do you see today? You know, where can I find a crested goshawk? Talk to people, and they would usually share information with you. Bird watching, when I first started, I thought it was a very solitary hobby. You know, just walk around alone, emo, quiet, look at bird, got people, and run away. But eventually I learned that it's actually a very, very social event in Singapore. There's so many people. You should go out there, talk to people, gain your experience, and that's how you'll be able to grow as a bird watcher and a naturalist.